Hi, today we're reading Front Desk by Kelly Yang, Chapter 26. It was agreed that from now on, if we put the blue hat on the front desk, it meant don't come in. Mr. Yao's there. And no hat meant come on in. We all shook hands on the new system and Aunt Lynn got into her car and drove off. I hoped that she would tell all her friends and we would soon get lots of visitors. Visitors who were heading in the direction of the 4 remaining addresses. Lupe was delighted to hear I was marching forward with my plan to show, not tell. She came over again the next day after school. The two of us sat at the front desk where, as usual, she proceeded to draw trees. "Why are you always drawing those things?" I asked her. Lupe didn't look up. Her eyes were completely focused on the page. Today she was drawing a massive oak with the tiny little lines in the trunk. "I like trees," she said, shading in the bark. She didn't just like trees, she was obsessed with drawing them and was really good at it too. There was so much detail in her creations, hundreds of twigs and branches and leaves which she would labor over for hours. She pulled out a blank piece of paper from the fax machine. "Here, I'll teach you," she said. I looked at her wary. I wasn't exactly what you call artistic. My idea of a good portrait was a smiley face with sunglasses. "You want to start off with the trunk," she said, pointing to my paper. I did as I was told, and she drew two thick lines for my trunk. "Not so straight," she said. She took her pencil and started making little vertical lines, lumps, and curves in my trunk. "No tree is perfect. Remember that," she said. "That's what gives it character." I smiled at Lupe and how grown up she sounded. It was one of the things I liked the most about her. She showed me how to add branches to my trunk. According to her, the easiest way to draw branches and twigs was just make lots and lots of tiny little V's. It was hard work making all those little V's, and I got a little impatient, so I started shading in my tree, eager to get on with it. "Don't rush," Lupe said, frowning at my shading and pointing to the tiny little twigs on her own tree. "See, it's all in the detail." We worked side by side for an hour, neither of us saying anything except occasionally to borrow the eraser. So deep were we into our drawings that we nearly jumped when Hank came in and knocked on the door. I buzzed him in. "Hey, can I have Mr. Yao's number?" Hank asked. "What for?" I asked him. "Didn't you say you had all those other motels? Maybe he needs a handyman," Hank said. "You want to ask Mr. Yao for a job?" I asked. I glanced at Lupe. But what?" Hank asked. He leaned into me. "Come on, Mia, I'm desperate." I wanted to tell him it didn't matter how desperate he was. Mr. Yao was not going to go for it. Not after all the horrible things he said that night when the car got stolen. But when I looked into Hank's eyes, he was the one who first warned me about... He was the one that first warned me about Mr. Yao. There was no way he would be asking me this if he had any other options. So I dialed the number and handed him the phone. "It's ringing," I told him. As Hank picked up the phone and started talking to Mr. Yao, Lupe hopped off our stools and went to my room. Gently I picked up the extension. "Hi, Mr. Yao. It's Hank Caleb calling from the Cala Vista," Hank said. "What do you want?" Mr. Yao asked, barely hiding the irritation in his voice. "I just want to call to see if you might need a handyman at one of your motels," Hank said. "Why, you know anybody? You know somebody?" Mr. Yao asked. "Yeah, me," Hank told him. "I spent a summer painting houses. I'm good with power tools, and I know how to use a pressure hose." Mr. Yao cut him off and told him flat out he was not interested. "The answer is no," Mr. Yao said. "But, Mr. Yao, you didn't even let me finish," I interjected. "I don't need to let him finish. There's nothing handy about Hank, only mafan," Mr. Yao said and hung up. I avoided Hank's gaze. I walked back into the office. "What's mafan mean?" he asked. "I don't know," I lied. I couldn't bring myself to say that mafan in Chinese meant trouble. Mr. Yao, always judging people. All right, that ends chapter 26.